He learned obedience by the things which he suffered, the things which he suffered when he himself sought, but also, as it were, was compelled to seek the despised society of publicans and sinners. When no one dared to acknowledge knowing him, when the curious doubtfully shook their heads, and those who regarded themselves as shrewd said derisively, "The fool," and the compassionate shrugged their shoulders commiseratingly, when the proud looked at him condemningly when he approached, and cowardice drew off to one side, when every man of reputation fled from him so as not to become suspect, when even the better among them made their relationship to him ambiguous, lest they lose altogether too much, when the one who had withdrawn in time deemed himself lucky, when no one believed he had any responsibility toward him, but thought anything was permissible as a self-defense against him, when even the beloved disciple denied him. He learned obedience by the things which he suffered, the things which he suffered when Pilate said, "Behold the man." It is not the wild revolt, not the blind, raging mob which insultingly speaks in this way. No, it is a distinguished man clad in purple who compassionately speaks thus. Judas sold him for 30 pieces of silver, but Pilate would sell him at an even better bargain. He would make him into a poor man, a pitiful object for the compassion of a raging mob. And thus his whole earthly life consisted in the heaviest suffering, heavy as no other man's can ever be, so heavy no man can describe it, so heavy that no language can express it. But for this very reason the suffering was in the highest sense such that obedience could be learned from it. For when one who is guilty suffers, there is not only no reason, which there never is, but there is not even an apparent reason for losing faith in God, any more than there is any merit if he patiently suffers his punishment. If, on the other hand, a man suffers innocently, then there is offered an opportunity to learn. The opportunity is offered, but it does not follow from that obedience is learned. But Christ learned obedience by the things which he suffered. He said, "If it be possible, Father, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but thine." That he said this is the first step of obedience, and that he drained the bitter cup is the second. If, without saying this, he had drained the bitter cup, his obedience would not have been perfect. Obedience indeed also inquires, first the appealing question and the inquiring prayer, whether it is the Father's will, whether some other way is not possible. And thus his whole life was obedience, obedience unto death, unto the death on the cross. He who was the truth and the way and the life. He who needed to learn nothing, he, nevertheless, learned one thing. He learned obedience. So near is the relation of obedience to the everlasting truth, that he who is the truth learns obedience. If it were now true that obedience followed as a matter of course from suffering, then there would certainly be someone who would have the courage to choose suffering, and someone who, if suffering came to him, would have the courage to deem himself fortunate. Alas, but it is not this way. It is not so easy to learn. The suffering itself is, humanly speaking, the first danger, but the second, the even more terrible danger, is if one failed to learn obedience. Suffering is a hazardous kind of instruction, for if one does not learn obedience, oh, then it is terrible. It is like the strongest medicine when it acts in the wrong way. In this danger, a man needs help. He needs God's help, otherwise he does not learn obedience. And if he does not learn obedience, he may learn the most pernicious things, learn cowardly despondency, learn to quench the spirit, learn to suppress all the noble fires within him, learn defiance and despair. Nevertheless, it is exactly because the instruction of obedience is so hazardous that we can say with justice that this school of suffering trains for eternity. For in no other school is there such danger, but neither is there so much to gain. The highest danger and the highest gain, but the highest gain is the eternal,